German infiltrators who had studied American culture found their preparation inadequate. They might know President Roosevelt's name or recognize American state capitals, but the depth of sports knowledge required to pass sustained questioning exceeded their training. Baseball wasn't just entertainment in America, it was cultural identity. Other questions proved equally effective. Where does the Lone Ranger come from? What's the next line? Call for Philip? The answer, Morris, completed a cigarette advertising jingle that every American had heard on the radio countless times. Infiltrators had no frame of reference for such questions. The cultural divide became the infiltrators' insurmountable obstacle. They could wear American uniforms and carry American weapons, but they couldn't fake American identity at the deep cultural level the checkpoint questions probed. By December 20th, the American counterintelligence net was tightening systematically around the remaining infiltrators. Every captured infiltrator provided more information under interrogation. American intelligence officers learned the infiltrators' tactics, their training methods, their mission objectives. The MPs refined their questioning techniques based on which questions had successfully exposed previous infiltrators. The infiltrators found themselves trapped in an impossible situation. They couldn't complete their missions without interacting with American personnel, but every interaction risked exposure. Their English, adequate for brief encounters, deteriorated under sustained questioning. Their cultural knowledge had obvious gaps. Their mannerisms betrayed European origins. Some infiltrators abandoned their missions and attempted to slip back to German lines. This proved nearly impossible. The front lines had become fluid and confused. American and German forces were intermixed across the Ardennes. Navigating back through combat zones while wearing enemy uniforms meant death from either side. Others attempted to hide in the chaos, ditching their jeeps and American uniforms, trying to blend into refugee columns, or hide in barns and abandoned buildings. American patrols and military police systematically swept rear areas, checking identities and searching buildings. Most were found within days. The captured infiltrators faced grim prospects. Under international law, specifically the Hague Convention, soldiers fighting in enemy uniforms were not entitled to prisoner-of-war protections. They could be tried and executed as spies or unlawful combatants. American military lawyers determined that wearing enemy uniforms during combat operations constituted a war crime. Courts-martial were swift. The infiltrators had been caught in American uniforms behind American lines. The evidence was irrefutable. Their own testimony confirmed they were German soldiers operating under false pretenses. The verdicts were predetermined. 18 German infiltrators were convicted by military tribunal and sentenced to death. They were executed by firing squad at Aindre-Chapelle in Belgium between December 21st and December 30th, 1944. The executions were carried out according to military protocol. The condemned men faced their deaths with varying degrees of composure. 3 more infiltrators were executed in January 1945 after later capture and trial. The total number executed reached 21 men. All had volunteered for Operation Greif, knowing the risks. All had accepted the mission despite understanding that capture meant death. Skorzeny himself avoided capture. He had remained with the 150th Panzer Brigade headquarters, coordinating the operation, but not personally infiltrating Allied lines. As the Battle of the Bulge turned against Germany in late December, Skorzeny withdrew with retreating German forces. He survived the war and would face his own reckoning later. By Christmas Day 1944, Operation Greif had effectively ended. Most infiltrators were dead, captured, or had abandoned their missions. The psychological impact lingered, but the actual infiltration operations had ceased. Operation Greif failed to achieve its tactical objectives but succeeded beyond expectations as psychological warfare. The infiltrators never captured the critical bridges over the Meuse River. They never severed communications sufficiently to paralyze American command and control. They never assassinated General Eisenhower or any senior Allied commander. The small teams achieved minor tactical successes, changed road signs, cut telephone lines, spread false rumors, but nothing that significantly affected the Battle of the Bulge's outcome. Yet the psychological impact was profound and lasting. For over a week, the American army had been paralyzed by suspicion and paranoia. Officers couldn't trust their own men. Soldiers questioned everyone they encountered. The checkpoint system created massive traffic jams as thousands of vehicles backed up at interrogation points. Entire divisions moved slower than necessary because every intersection required security checks. The disruption to American logistics and command efficiency during those critical first days of the Battle of the Bulge may have been worth more than any tactical sabotage the infiltrators could have accomplished. German forces gained precious time as American reinforcements moved sluggishly through checkpoint-clogged roads. General Bradley later estimated that the paranoia caused by Operation Greif delayed American counter-movements by at least 24 hours. In a battle where hours mattered, this was significant. The psychological operation had achieved what conventional military operations could not. It had made the Americans fear themselves. The operation also revealed vulnerabilities in Allied security that had been dangerously overlooked. American military culture emphasized speed, flexibility, and trust within the chain of command. Security procedures were relatively casual compared to more rigid military organizations. Operation Greif exposed how this openness could be exploited. After the battle, American military intelligence implemented new security protocols. Identification procedures became more stringent. Code words and authentication systems were developed for radio communications. Units established recognition signals that couldn't be easily compromised. The lessons learned from Operation Greif influenced American military security doctrine for the remainder of the war. The operation's failure cost Germany valuable resources. The 150th Panzer Brigade had consumed scarce vehicles, fuel, and ammunition. The training and preparation had diverted personnel from conventional combat units. The captured American equipment used for the operation could never be replaced. Most critically, 21 trained commandos were executed, men who could have served in conventional roles. For the executed infiltrators, the operation proved that deception in warfare carries the highest possible price. They had volunteered knowing the risks. They had accepted missions that violated international law. They paid with their lives not for cowardice or failure, but for success at an impossible task. The Battle of the Bulge itself turned decisively against Germany by early January 1945. American forces, reinforced and reorganized, began pushing German units back. The surprise was over. The weather cleared, allowing Allied air power to devastate German columns. By late January, the Bulge American lines had been eliminated. Otto Skorzeny survived the war and faced trial at Dachau in 1947 for war crimes related to Operation Greif. The charges were specific and damning. Skorzeny had organized and commanded an operation that violated the Hague Convention by having soldiers fight in enemy uniforms. 21 of his men had been executed for these violations. As the operation's architect and commander, Skorzeny bore ultimate responsibility. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Captured orders bore Skorzeny's signature. Surviving infiltrators testified about the training and mission objectives. American officers described the chaos and disruption caused by the operation. The case appeared straightforward. Skorzeny had ordered war crimes. His men had committed them. He should be held accountable. But the trial took an unexpected turn. The defense called a surprise witness, British Commando leader Major Forrest Yo Thomas, a decorated war hero, who had operated behind German lines during special operations. Yo Thomas testified that British and American forces had also used enemy uniforms during special operations in occupied Europe. The testimony created legal confusion. If Allied forces had employed similar tactics, how could Germans be prosecuted for the same actions? The defense argued that wearing enemy uniforms for infiltration was a common practice by all sides, making it an accepted if unwritten convention of modern warfare. The tribunal faced a difficult question. International law prohibited fighting in enemy uniforms, but the law's application had become murky. The Hague Convention hadn't anticipated special operations, commando raids, or the type of unconventional warfare that had become common in World War II. On September 9, 1947, the tribunal acquitted Skorzeny of all charges. The ruling stated that while Operation Greif had involved wearing enemy uniforms, Skorzeny had ordered his men not to fight while wearing those uniforms, only to use them for infiltration and then remove them before combat. This technical distinction, questionable given the actual conduct of the operation, provided legal justification for acquittal. The verdict was controversial. Many American officers who had dealt with Operation Greif's aftermath felt justice had not been served. The executed infiltrators had been condemned for following Skorzeny's orders, yet Skorzeny walked free. The inconsistency troubled many observers. Skorzeny's post-war life proved as adventurous as his military career. He escaped from an internment camp in 1948 and fled to Spain, where he lived under the protection of Francisco Franco's government. He became involved in various business ventures and allegedly worked as an advisor to Egyptian and South American governments. Rumors circulated that he maintained connections with former SS members and neo-Nazi organizations, though definitive proof remained elusive. He lived comfortably in Spain until his death from cancer in 1975, never expressing regret for Operation Greif or acknowledging the deaths of the men who had followed his orders. He remained defiant to the end, viewing himself as a soldier who had followed orders and executed bold operations in service of his country. The legal and moral questions raised by Operation Greif in Skorzeny's trial remain debated among military historians and legal scholars. Operation Greif left a lasting impact on military doctrine, intelligence operations, and the understanding of psychological warfare. The operation demonstrated that cultural knowledge could serve as an effective security barrier. The baseball questions, state capitals, and pop culture references that exposed German infiltrators proved more reliable than documents, uniforms, or even language ability. An enemy could forge papers and steal uniforms, but they couldn't fake deep cultural understanding acquired through a lifetime of immersion in American society. This lesson influenced military security procedures for decades. During the Cold War, American military units developed authentication protocols based on cultural knowledge that potential adversaries couldn't easily replicate. The concept that culture itself could be weaponized, used both offensively for infiltration and defensively for identification, became embedded in intelligence and counterintelligence doctrine. Operation Greif also revealed the power of psychological warfare. The infiltrators' tactical achievements were minimal. They never captured their primary objectives. They disrupted some communications and misdirected some units, but nothing decisive. Yet the psychological impact, the paranoia, the checkpoints, the delays, the breakdown of trust achieved what direct military action could not. The operation forced military planners to recognize that morale and psychology were as important as firepower and logistics. An army that doesn't trust itself cannot fight effectively. Operation Greif had turned that insight into operational reality, even if only briefly. For American soldiers who experienced the Battle of the Bulge, the memory of those suspicious checkpoints and cultural interrogations remained vivid for life. Veterans remembered the paranoia, the absurdity of being questioned about baseball by their own military police, the surreal experience of proving their identity to fellow Americans. Some found humor in it decades later. Others remembered only the fear and confusion. The 21 executed infiltrators became footnotes in history. Their names are recorded in military archives but largely forgotten by the public. They volunteered for an operation they knew could result in execution if captured. They accepted those risks in service of their country, as soldiers throughout history have done. Whether their mission was justified, whether their deaths were legal, whether Skorzeny should have been held accountable, these questions have no simple answers. What remains certain is that a simple question about baseball, a game played with bat and ball, uniquely American in character, became the barrier that stopped one of World War II's most audacious deception operations. Cultural knowledge, something intangible and seemingly frivolous, proved more powerful than elaborate disguises and careful preparation. Operation Greif failed, but it succeeded in proving that in modern warfare, knowing who won the World Series could be as important as knowing how to fire a rifle. Identity, culture, and trust became weapons in a war that was fought not just with tanks and artillery, but with words, questions, and the small details that separate friend from enemy. The infiltrators came close. They wore the uniforms. They spoke the language. They carried the weapons. But they couldn't answer a simple question about baseball, and that made all the difference. Ende.